we go. Cool. Well, welcome you guys. So glad, guys and gals, that are here today. Like, we're just pumped out of our mind. I'm gonna yield for just a second. I'm gonna share the screen. I'm gonna do my best to share the screen here. And I'm gonna yield to Kay. Kay, I'm gonna let you, before we get into our conversation, talk a little bit about our Think Tank Live. And we rolled it out this morning, and so it's hot off the presses. And so Kay's going to give you a little description of that. Some of you are new, haven't heard of it. Some of you that are old have heard of it or whatever. I'll let Kay talk a little bit about it while I navigate this screen share.
Yeah, Think Tank Live. Basically, what we decided to do a couple of years ago is that we have this Think Tank call, and there's a lot of people that come on this call on a regular basis and have been seeing each other. And so we decided, man, what would it be like if we got everybody together? So we meet in Vegas in October, which is much better than meeting in the summertime, right, Shane? So we meet in October in the first week, October the 4th through the 6th. We'll be having it there. 48 hours. Come in on basically a Wednesday, and you leave on a Friday. Friday. So basically, the cost is $199. Scroll down a little bit. There's the speakers right under there. We've got Rusty George from Real Life Church. We've got Mark Lee from Vantage Point. We've got Shane Phillips, who's going to be on this call, or is on this call as at Crossing. We've got Lance Witt, who was on video last year, but he's going to be in the room with us, and with Replenish, and then the Momentum team. So it's a stacked lineup. For sure, and we just cannot wait. They're all excited to be there with us. Day one, just arrival, and then a really, really special dinner. And if you think about coming in late after the dinner, do not miss this dinner.
That would be a mistake.
It would be a huge mistake. So we wanted to, we just have to put the if you know, you don't. If you know, you know. Day two is the bulk of the meeting, and basically it's where the special guests will be, round tables, lunch included, all that stuff. And then in the evening we'll have Top Golf with dinner provided there. Really a time that we can just come and hang out with all the content and stuff that we learned throughout the day. And then the next day really is a replenishment day. Golf. Pool cabana at Bellagio, hiking, that's a guided experience or self-guided. So really just be able to rest and then take off. So it's a really, really light schedule. But the relationships and the network, people, you'll be able to see all the people that you've met over the Zoom over the years, and see how tall or short they are, because that's usually the first thing that you observe when you see them live, right? So yeah, that's
or how gray they are, Kate. How gray they are or bald they
are. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's Think Tank Live. The registration is now live.
I just linked it in the chat if you want it. It's in the chat.
Perfect. Cool. So yeah, if you got any questions, let us know.
And it is designed for, just to be clear, like our think tank, etc. We really we're not hardcore on it, but it's really designed for lead pastors, executive pastors, campus pastors. Somebody saying it's not designed for your staff. It's not designed for your children's person. You can tell by our guests that it's really designed for those that are at the table, executive level leadership, that are able to influence and lead both their church, their organization, and their team. And it is a combination of replenishment and resource. So if you like to replenish, hang out with people, have great conversations, you'll get that. If you want content, you're going to get that as well. So, and it's intimate. Our plan this year is to cap it at about 60 or 70. Last year there was about 50. So register it up and make it happen. All right, cool. All right. Today, I'm gonna get over here on this. Kay's laughing at me right now as I try to navigate all of the different things. Just to go large on here. There we go. So on the deck that you're gonna get, you will get the registration. So when you get the PDF, it's gonna be there. And so you'll be able to register. Again, if there's a couple of you, or if it's a lead guy and you're executive or you're number two, bring them. Cool. Today, I just want to I'm going to just kick off for like 2 seconds, and then I'm really going to give it all to Shane, because Shane's the man and he's here, and do some Q&A. And he's going to talk about some expectation stuff. So I just wanted to give you guys one resource that's really not even spiritual at all, but it could be. And then I'm going to throw it to him. So we loved on these calls to kind of get practical with our working on it, because that's really what this call is, and then get a little personal. I think Shane's conversation that he's going to have with us today kind of leans in the middle of that, but I think it leans more towards the personal. Let me share with you guys a book that I just got done reading. Don't laugh at the title. It's called Die with Zero. I know it's like, oh gosh, another one of those books, right? Like spend all your money. But Kay and I were having this conversation with the lead guy yesterday, and I read this book sort of begrudgingly, like somebody gave it to me. And I thought, okay, what is this? But it really kind of matched up in many ways with sort of life direction that I like to have, and a lot of people around me have. And basically the principle is this, is that the guy argues for full quality of life, full experience, because all truth is God's truth. I would argue that he's arguing that God has created us and wired us in a certain way to experience life at its fullest, live out his kingdom at its fullest, but also our lives. But he argues for this, you guys. He basically says the goal is for you to get to be as healthy as possible as a person, emotionally, spiritually, physically, for as long as possible, because that's where your highest quality of life and leadership is going to be. And so picture this health span and extending that as long as possible in your own life. He argues that most people's health span from birth to death will go like this. He actually says if he could control it, which he couldn't, that when we get to the end of our health span, that we would just drop dead. I know. But basically health span. Then he argues that your resource level in your life is typically going to go like this. Okay. Like, you get better at your job, your career, et cetera. That typically, not for everybody, but your resources are going to go like this. And that the key is to to extend that health span as long as possible, and where that highest resource intersects with that health span in your life, to leverage it, to experience life at its fullest, to bless people, to be generous during that season. So it has personal implications, but I would argue, and we would argue, that it also has organizational and church implications for those of you that are leading church organizations. That two things. One is, how do we get our culture to be as healthy as possible? And Shane's going to talk a little bit about that in just a second, right? How do we extend the health span and speak into the health span of our organizations? At the same time, how do we build resource and then leverage those resources for as long as possible during that healthy season, during that healthy season of life? How do we do that? And so he's going to argue for that in this book. He argues for that. So I'm gonna encourage you guys to read it and to look at it from the perspective of both your personal life, but also your organization. Like, what does that look like for us? Because too many churches have aged out, and you guys all know them, where they're like this church that has all these resources, but the church isn't healthy, or the people are too tired or too done to actually leverage it. So many of you guys are leading churches right now that need to get healthy, or you're leading a church that's healthy that needs resources, or you're leading a church that has resource and is in a healthy period. And you got to figure out, not how do we all, and I'm not talking about being frivolous, being crazy, but how do we leverage that strategically? We always say, be led of the Spirit, be aware of the strategy, in a way that can actually increase the influence for the kingdom of God of the church that you're leading. And so that's just a quick resource today that you might pick up for yourself as well. If you're on the call, if you could mute, that would be like amazing. If you're not muted, mute, because we really don't want to hear your convo. It would be really bad. But make sure that if it's something that interests you both personally or et cetera, that you grab that book, Die with Zero. So that's the extent. All right, let me turn it over to Shane. So I'll get out of the way. You guys have heard enough from me. I've been working with this guy for 16 years, and he's been putting up with me. And he's going to be part of our Think Tank Live as well in October. And he's got something I think is really awesome that he's going to share. We're in the process of expanding a network of churches here in Las Vegas through partnerships and church plants and locations that we're pretty excited about in this season. And so I just invited him to share his heart today. He's got some stuff he wants to share, but he's also here for the duration. So if there's other things from both a senior or executive level that you want to chat with him about, go for it. Hey, Shane, Derek looks really bored already, so you're going to need to talk to him about that at some point. All right?
Derek,
all
that's
right.
just because we don't give him enough work. you know.
He's bored. All right, Shane, take it away. I'm running your slides, so I'll do my best to keep up.
Keep up. Hey guys, good to be with you. I am a fan of pastors because I know what it is to sit in your seat, and it's what brings all of you guys together. Is that there's very few environments where we get around where we know what it's like. We can just look at each other and go, yeah, I know what you're going through. And something that that's really been resonating with me, and I think it took me a long time to articulate this, is this idea of managing expectations versus creating expectations. And so listen, expectations are universal. If you're married, you understand expectations. No comments. This is being recorded, so we don't want to throw you under the bus. Whether you are an executive pastor, a senior pastor, a campus pastor, everyone has expectations of you. Your elders have expectations, the staff have expectations, and church people have expectations. I mean, church people, they expect you that you will never talk about money, but that you'll have the best children's programs for their kids, student ministry for their teens, women's gatherings once a month, staff dedicated to men's ministry and small groups, scholarships for their kids to go to camp, that you will take their call at all hours of the night and be at the hospital if they have a hangnail. I mean, it is the expectations of church people, and we get it. And I think it's funny how everybody has expectations of how you will raise your kids. When my son was about 10, he's now 35, he's on our staff, been on our staff a long time. But when my son was about 10, it was pretty cool for guys to have highlights in their hair back in the 90s. And so Josiah wanted to get highlights, and so we did it. And so I came to church, and somebody at church said to me, they go, I can't believe you let your son get highlights and you're a pastor. And I'm like, what in the world does that have to do with anything? But everybody has expectations. And just as a little side note, we never had expectations of our kids based on my job. There was never a conversation in our family where it's, well, because dad's a pastor, you can't do this, or you have to go to this. Our conversations were always, because we're followers of Jesus, this is how we live. And so, there was times where I had to take the bullet for people's expectations of my kids. But let me talk a little bit and give you some suggestions on managing expectations, okay? Because we all have to manage expectations. Number one, here's the first thing, is don't get defensive. It is easy to react quickly in defense. We tend to take comments very personal. And so when people begin to shove their expectations on us, we get defensive. And so take a breath before you respond. Second thing, ask questions. Why did that bother you? What would you like for me to say or for me to do? And try to get to the bottom of their expectations, because sometimes them hearing themselves talk will diffuse a situation or an expectation that people put on you.
Hey, Shane, can you go back to the defensive thing real quick?
Yep.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit,
okay,
because I know you have examples. Otherwise, I wouldn't pause and ask you. You have one from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
You're preaching on finance. Talk about getting defensive, or the navigating of that in that circumstance.
I had this lady come up to me. We did a 2-week series on money, and it was her first week at the church. And so she waited to talk to me at the very end, and she goes, I am so disappointed. And she goes, I cannot believe you would talk about tithing in church. And I go, and so I started getting defensive. I go, number one, I told you this wasn't for you. This is for our church people. And she said, oh, I'm traumatized. And I go, well, you shouldn't have been traumatized. This is for church people. This is for followers of Jesus. And what I did is I reacted quickly in defense. And where I was kicking myself later is for me, if I wouldn't have been defensive, just to go, why did that bother you? Why, it's our first week, and and I try to explain, hey, we don't talk about money every week. She goes, you don't? I'm like, I go, no, I go, I've not talked on tithing in 2 years. And, but I was quick to get defense. And sometimes I think when I get defensive is because people catch me off guard. And Darla, my wife, always says to me, she goes, you can't be like that in the lobby. You need to expect the worst out of people. So, and and so take a breath.
Yeah.
That we take stuff personally that I think people are reacting to you personally. And so just take a step back from that.
As a leader, Shane, what are the things that you think we're most likely to get defensive of? Senior leaders on here, like what's the triggers for you? And what do you think are likely triggers? Money?
That you're not strong enough on the truth, so you got the whole LGBTQ stuff that people don't think you're truth, or that you don't have enough grace on that stuff. I think when we get into these hot button political issues, is when I tend to get most offensive. And, it's those things that just really trigger me, because I don't want to be viewed as somebody who is full of hate or doesn't care about the truth of scripture. And that's the stuff that, when people accuse me of, watering down the gospel or whatever they want to call it, boy, that stuff sets me off. And Lee loves it. He loves to watch, all that stuff. So, another suggestion I'd have on managing, you don't have to agree to be likable. Sometimes we feel like we have to agree to their expectation. You don't have to, but don't be combative either. That does not help you. I love what Mike Bro says. When criticism comes to him in the lobby, Mike Bro says all the time, he'll just go, you may be right. Talk about diffusing situations. When somebody comes and criticize, you may be right. And linked to that, you don't have to respond immediately to whatever expectation. Hey, let me ponder that. Let me get back to you on that. And so that way you have time to come up with the strategy of why you don't do something or why you do something. I think to ask yourself, is this a hill to die on? Because sometimes that's the Mike Bro quote. You might be right. This isn't a hill for me to die on. There are some hills that I will die on. But a lot of times we die on a hill that we're like, that wasn't that big a deal. And here's the last thing, is you're trying to manage them. The last thing that I came up with, there's probably a lot more, but set appropriate boundaries. Obviously, you need to handle different people in different ways. And you'll need to manage the elders' expectations of you differently than the person who is nominally involved. So set appropriate boundaries. I mean, when the elders ask something of me, man, there is very few boundaries, because they're my boss, all of that. But somebody, it is, one of the things, this really is not what this talk is about, but one of the things that I will often do is, if I've got somebody who has a high expectation, I'll go into our finance guy and I'll go, can you tell me if they're a tither? Because if they tithe or they serve, then I'm going to treat them differently than I would if they don't have any skin in the game. So that this is not what this talk is about.
That's going to make some guys crazy, some of our leaders. So maybe I don't want to go too squirrel on this, but I think for just a second to go unpack that a little bit for those that immediately makes them squirm a little bit.
Well, and what I mean, it's not that I don't value everybody, but if somebody's highly invested and they've got a major problem, I'm going to give them more. If they're one of if they're an elder, if they're serving everywhere, I'm going to give them more credibility than I'm going to give somebody who
so really, it's not just the money thing. It's part of it,
No.
But it's like, is this person invested? Are they engaged at some level? I.e.,
Yes.
the lady that came up in the lobby, you're going to be kind, etc. She's obviously a guest, but at the end of the day, the amount of energy there is going to be somewhat dictated outside of
Yep.
pastoring, right? But
Yep.
outside of pastoring,
You know, it comes to that old, is it the Teddy Roosevelt quote, you know, where he said, you know, if they're in the arena fighting with you, then you listen to them. If they're not in the arena, then don't take their, you know, their opinion to heart, you know, and that was a really bad paraphrase, but, and it's not that people with, that I'm just looking at their money, but I want to know, do you have an investment here? Because if you don't, I'm going to treat you with respect and I'm going to try to spend time with you. If you're invested here, I will go the extra mile. And so, whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, that's one of the things that I will use. I'm talking about when I've got a major issue with somebody. I want to find out, are they invested in this church?
So
And,
in the chat, Shane, Jeff Bachman, he's in the Bay Area. He was asking, kind of asking and kind of just like, yeah, like how do you do that where you say, you know, you kind of expect the worst in people, and you know what you mean by that? Like, don't be surprised by that. How do you leverage? And Jeff, you can help me if I mess your question up. But how do you both expect the worst in people and push off the jadedness that can come from that perspective? Like how do you best do that practically?
you know, you know, listen, I try to, and I don't even know whether this is going to answer the question, man. I find if you will respect and treat people kindly, that will alleviate a lot of the issues that start to come at you. And, and so, when I'm out in the lobby, it's not that I expect the worst, but I'm going to be guarded, so that I don't immediately answer in passion or in anger or in defensiveness. That it's just being prepared when I'm going into certain environments for what I'm going to face.
Got it. Sorry, I'll keep you going. I'll
Yep.
put it back up on the screen.
Yeah, good. So all of that, managing expectations, that's really not what this is about. Okay. I want to talk about creating expectations. See, most of us manage expectations. In other words, we are reactive instead of proactive. And this learning was transformational for my leadership, because many of the expectations we manage are expectations we have created. So just take that in. Many of the expectations that you manage, they are expectations you have created for yourself. So let me throw Lee under the bus here for a second. We all know and love Lee and his leadership. He's one of a kind. But one of the things that, if you know him, Lee will text you day and night. It doesn't matter. He lives on text message. So when I
Really?
text him, yeah, I know it's hard to believe, isn't it, Kay? Yeah. So when I text him, I expect an immediate response. That's not the way it is for everyone. Kevin Oder, I don't know if you guys know who Kevin Oder is. He was the pastor of Canyon Ridge Christian Church here in Vegas for 25 years. One of my dearest friends. I worked for him for 6 years. When I text KO, I may not get a response for a week. And I just know that when I text him. So each of these guys have created my expectation of them. So how do you create expectations that serve you best? And so let me address a few areas that will have a major impact. So let me just talk about, let me just ask senior pastors here, because I want to help you create some expectations that will serve you better in the way that you lead. So the number of weeks, senior pastors, the number of weeks that you preach, let's say, I'll come back to it, that your study breaks for XPs, the number of direct reports that you manage for both of you, your days off. What does that look like? What does vacation look like? Because I'm a senior pastor, I understand this role better. XPs, translate this into your role, but how are you leading and delegating? If you solve every problem for people who come into your office, then that's the expectation you've created. you've created an expectation that you're going to solve the problem rather than helping them solve their own problem. You know, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, just on that, just a side note, don't come into my office with a problem if you don't have a couple solutions. And then I can help you figure out if you've got a good solution, bad solution. So let me just ask senior pastors, how many of you preach 45 weeks a year or more? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many would say you preach 40 to 45 weeks per year? Raise your hand. Okay. 35 to 40. 35 to 40. How many would preach 35 to 40? Okay. 30 to 35. 30 to 35. Now, how many less than 30? Any less than 30? I can't tell if anybody, if that's you, we all hate you. So study break. So let me just ask on study break. How many take an extended study break sometime during the year? 3 to 6 weeks, whatever you call it. How many do that? Okay, a few of you. I'm going to throw something out there just for a senior pastor role that this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. I don't think it is healthy to preach more than 40 weeks a year. Okay, that's just my opinion. I personally believe you'll be fresher and have better content if you take at least 12 Sundays a year, and it will help develop other teaching pastors around you. The guys that I know who preach more than that, here's their pushback. So I'll just use this as an example. They'll go, you know, our people expect me to preach 48 weeks a year. And my pushback is that is an expectation you have created. That when you preach 48 times a year, they expect you to preach 48 times a year.
And Shane, if I can interrupt you and throw you under the bus because you threw me under the bus, I'm going to stop responding to your text, by the way, for like a long time because
okay, yeah, no.
If you're completely candid, this is a learned thing for you. Not It wasn't something that you adopted from day one, right? Even when you and I began to work together, there was, and I think this is okay for me to say, there was an unnecessary paranoia that you lived with around that expectation. Is that fair as far as communication, right?
Absolutely. Because you have this paranoia, people think you're not working. You know, this is what we pay you to do. And so, yeah, and it was a self-induced expectation. So I'll just, you know, let me just comment on this. I actually think the sweet spot for senior leaders, senior pastors, is 2/3 of the time. So 35 to 36 weekends a year. This is something I heard from Bill Hybels years ago. He said that he believed that the senior pastor needs to speak 2/3 of the time to effectively lead and cast vision. So I'll tell you where I am these days. I actually only speak about 30, at the most 32 times a year these days. Now, this is all contingent on your age, your experience, your tenure at the church as senior pastor. I'm 55. I started the Crossing. We are 23 years old. So I've got a lot of change in my pocket. If you're 35 and you've only been a senior pastor for a year, then you need to figure out what is a reasonable expectation for you to create. You can't probably go in there and go, you know what? I know I'm a new senior pastor. I'm only going to do 25 times a year. It's probably not going to fly. So, you know, think through that. Same thing with study break. Okay. For me to be healthy and fresh, I need to pull away from speaking and writing sermons for 5 to 6 weeks during the summer. And when I tell guys this, they'll say, well, my church would never let me do that. Now, I'm not off 5 or 6 weeks. Usually I'll take 4 to 5 weeks off. But, you know, guys will go, my church would never let me do that. Well, that may be true, but that is an expectation you have created. They expect you to be there all summer because you've always been there all summer. My church, what's that?
No, I was going to say, so for the guys who are alongside a lead guy, like they're in my role or some of the roles, like careful here, but how would you help them have that conversation, assuming they're partnering with a lead or a senior guy that might be helpful?
Well, and I think for them personally or for their senior pastor needing to do
If
this.
they feel like their senior guy has created unhealthy expectations there, is that something they can even deal with, or is it just that it is what it is?
I think it is, and I think obviously it depends on your relationship. If your senior pastor is threatened by you, it's going to be harder. And if they feel like that you're trying to grab power from them, whether that is true or not, it's going to have to be different. But I think to begin to push them in starting to expand that. See, my church and my elders never expect me to be there during the summer because that is an expectation I've created. So how do you get there? You know, it may be, I'll talk senior pastor and then Lee, let's talk, you know, XP. You know, it may be talking to your elders and sharing that you need to unplug and pull away for your own health. And perhaps it starts with 3 weeks, 3 weekends. Maybe you're only gone 2 weeks, but you're not preaching for 3 Sundays, and it expands from there. This summer, I'm not preaching for 7 Sundays in a row. Last year that was 8 in a row. Now we do at the movies, so I'm actually preaching 3 of those 7 because I'm on screen. So my presence is there even when I'm not. So, Lee, talk about how you would suggest XPs can begin to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that part of where we've had the conversation a little bit is understanding that healthy quality communication is better than quantity communication, right?
Mhm.
That Shane really on point 30 to 32 times is better than 40 times that's just he's tired, it's not great. But I do think that it's a bit of a journey for sure, right?
Mhm.
Whether you're the secondary communicator or not. Some of you are, some of you aren't. You're not a communicator at all. So I think you do have to legitimately have a trust factor that allows you to speak into overarching health. And then even creating a little bit of a pathway for them to see that, if that makes sense. Like, hey, here's how this would look. Some of the creative ways we've done that, where Shane's doing at the movies, so he's still on screen even when he's not. Maybe there's some other ways that you can do that. I think Brandon brings up a good point in the chat. Some of you are at way smaller venues, so you're preaching more because you don't have any other options. But I think you can get creative even with that, and even build a teaching team of people outside of your church community in the near term.
Yep.
That would come in and bridge that gap. And so, you know, that would be a pathway of conversation that I would ask. I would even start with, I would probably have said to you, Shane, like, in a perfect world, how many are you speaking? And then go, okay, let me help you get there. And here's some
Yep.
creative ways. And the way you get there is not going, I'll take the other 10. That's not the way you get there. But to go, you know, how do we mix in? We're even in that stage now here at the Crossing where it's like Shane, myself, but we also have Derek and some of our younger guys that we're trying to mix in. And so that's important that we back away a little bit, work on it, as we would say, grow minimum, and kind of go, what's the best thing for the long-term health of our church? And get there. I think some of you are also probably dealing with all the young guns wanting to speak a lot, you know, and like, hey, it's better if the 30-year-old's up there, even if he's not bringing any content that's worth, you know, bringing. And I think that's a tension as well. You know, there's a reason why Tim Keller was 70 years old and still was relevant. And so I don't think it's all about demographic of speaker, but I think there's definitely a conversation to be had there.
Yeah, you know, and I think as you know, I'll talk to senior leaders, but also to XPs, because if you're an XP and you're doing stuff that threatens your senior pastor, now some of that's just because, you know, we're flawed people, and so you know, but I remember several years ago, I was on my break. I was on my summer break, and Lee was preaching on the weekend, but I was in town, and I was going to have lunch with one of my buddies afterwards, and so I meet him, and I go, "Hey, how was church this morning?" Because I didn't watch it. I was off. I didn't want to watch it. And he goes, "That was the best sermon I've ever heard in my life." And then he stops and he goes, "Does that bother you?" And I'm like, Why would that bother me? I hired Lee. Why would I want him to fail? When he looks good, it makes me look good. It makes me look like a genius that I've got him on staff. And and there's a part of this that, man, if a guy's only preaching, Lee preaches more than this, but if a guy's only preaching 4 or 6 times a year, they ought to be good every time they get up. They ought to have a lot of good content that they've created. But I think ways that you can get there is, obviously, are there people on your staff that you can give a shot? And so for every context, is there some other people that you can bring in? Is there somebody who has a great sermon that you can show their video? I've even done this for guys where they've used my videos, and I will do a shout out to their church. Say, hey, Ridge Church, glad to be coming with you, coming at you, and that's all it takes. Then they can show my video at their church during a summer break. So just get creative in that. Let me talk about one more thing, and then I'll shift on this. That the rhythm of preaching that works best for you, if you're a senior guy. I preach 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and then I try to take 2 weeks off in a row. So it's just the rhythm for me. I'm best if I'm only preaching 3 or 4 times in a row. I just get tired. But taking 2 weeks off is something I learned from Andy Stanley. The reason is when you take 1 week off, you're just playing catch up from all the crap you haven't been able to do. But when you take 2 weeks off, it allows you to focus on strategic initiatives, vision that otherwise you don't have time to do. And so I would encourage you to find a rhythm that allows you to be able to pull away from the thing that's the most time consuming so that you can put it into strategic initiatives. Okay. So let me shift. Anything on any comments on that, Lee or Kay or anybody that would be helpful? Okay. So let me talk about the principle of your days off. Okay. Again, what are the expectations you're creating? My first ministry, the senior pastor only took 1.5 days off every week. That was the expectation of the elders. And then that was the expectation that the senior pastor created for everybody on staff. Our staff, we take 2 days off. I personally take off Saturday and Monday. It sucks not having 2 days in a row, but Monday is glorious because you come to the finish line of Sunday. And here's the expectation that I've created, that I will do people work on Saturday. What I mean by that is a wedding, a funeral, volunteer team days. I don't do office work. I don't do coffees and that type of thing. But Monday is sacred. I don't take calls. I don't make appointments. I don't answer emails, nothing. Nobody expects me to do anything on Monday because that's an expectation I've created. Appointments in the evenings. I used to, when I was early on in ministry, people were like, hey, I have to work. Can you do counseling at 7 o'clock? And so I did it. I don't do that anymore. That for me, I have one standing appointment a week that my executive assistant can put anybody in. Now, obviously, when you're newer in ministry, you don't have as many people, you can't do this. But Tuesday at 3:30, she can put anybody in there to see me. But years ago, I decided I'm not doing evening appointments. When you go to the doctor, you don't ask the doctor to come back in at 7 p.m. If you want to see me, then you work around that. I'll take my last appointment at 5 o'clock. So you get off early enough to get here by 5, I'll meet with you. Obviously, there's exceptions. And obviously, I do meetings in the evenings every week. But that is, but as far as counseling, so learn to be proactive in your calendar.
I think that's the key right there, right? Shane, to interrupt you a little bit.
Yes.
It's not like, hey, write all this down. And so all you are going to go to your people and say, I don't meet anybody except for 3:30 on Thursday. That's not the point, right? The point is you got to get control of the yes and no and the rhythm of your replenishment and the rhythm of your ministry and what it's going to be. Because remember, all this goes back to you're creating the expectations.
Right.
So if you're ready, if you're willing to meet people at 7, 8 o'clock at Starbucks and be there for 2 hours and your spouse is hating you, that's your issue, not the person who's asking you to do that.
Right.
That's the challenge we have to be real about. Is that fair?
Yep. Yep. And I think it's being proactive. So when someone asks me to do something, man, I just go, hey, I'm already booked then. How about we meet here? Now, I don't tell them that I'm booked to have dinner at home and to swim with my kids. They don't need to know that, but I'm already booked. I've already got something going on. For me, I don't do breakfast appointments because I'm freshest then. So I want my freshest time to be when I'm sitting down to write a sermon. But I do lunches every Tuesday and Thursday. I do coffees every Tuesday and Thursday. So you figure out the rhythm that serves you and create that expectation, because then people will not begin to do it. So let me just ask, what are the expectations you need to gain control of? And create rhythms that best reflect your personality and your replenishment cycle. So let me just repeat that. What are the expectations you need to gain control of and create rhythms that best reflect your personality and your replenishment cycle? Now, here's the thing that I would just shift here just as we end is, what are the expectations you are, as a leader, you're putting on your staff under you? And so obviously, as a senior leaders, we have expectations of our staff. We have expectations. You're going to work at a certain time, but are you putting expectations on people that are thwarting their replenishment cycle? And how do you begin to figure that out and to help them so that you're not putting undue expectations on the people you work for? Now, you're the boss. So there's times where you need to step up the expectations, but it is creating these expectations. So instead of managing it and being reactive to everything, it is for you to sit down and going, okay, where do I need to gain control of my life? And how do I create these healthy expectations? So that's all I got for
Cool.
you.
No, it's good. So 2 things. One is I want to take about 5 minutes and just let kind of conversation or questions happen. I didn't share the screen because I didn't want to take Shane out, but in the chat, the question he just asked is there. You might have seen it. So if you missed that, I slid it into the chat. That idea that's there. Take a second. We have about 5 minutes. Relative to the conversation, again, Shane's going to be with us in October. He'll mingle with you guys a little bit. If you have other things, cool. But relative to this managing and creating expectations, follow-up questions, unmute one at a time and go for it.
I had one. How would you approach a lead pastor that as an XP who needs to really work on some of these expectations things, and is as the church is growing, he's still acting like it's a church of 100 when now it's a church of 500?
I would do a couple things. I would, perhaps one of the things that you can do is to try to get him in circles with other guys who would be where you want to be, and begin to learn those expectations. Who can you put him into to help mentor him? If it, for you to, you may be in the position to go, hey, let's look at this church. And man, I think the senior pastor is doing a great job. How do we get you to the place that you now are ready to lead a church of 1,000? I always think of, of the double the impact. And so if I'm a church of 500 and I want to be a church of 1,000, how do we start operating as a church of 1,000? I think that's one of the questions of you going, instead of going, man, we're still functioning back here, to go, okay, how do you need to change? If you're going to be leading a church of 1,000, who do you need to be? And how do we get you there to begin to function in that way? And those are some of the things that, because then if you can open up the mindset to going, okay, hopefully it'll go, I'm not leading even at you don't have to say you're not leading at a 500 level. Let's just change it. How do we get you to lead at that next level? How do we get you to be prepared for that church of 1,000?
And
yeah.
at the risk of sounding self-serving, Kelly, part of what we have pushed into a lot of the churches that we're partnering with, and you guys, a lot of you on the call are doing, is I think to couple with Shane is like establishing a vision that's 10 years down the road, right? Even if it is that doubling that Shane's referring to, and then working backwards, we'll start to actually tee that conversation up, right? We were just with a church yesterday in South Dakota going, okay, in 10 years, we want to be this. That sounds crazy. What does it look like in 3 years? And I think that conversation, Kelly, could actually be interesting, right? Because we've had to have it, Shane and I, around like, okay, in order for 10 to be true, what does 3 need to look like for you in all ways? So that you're not just acting like a church of 10,000, right? But that it's like, okay, what does the next few years need to look like to get us to that point? I think is key. Now, if we don't know where we're going, that's problematic, right? Like, okay, now I don't really know where I'm going. Great question, Kelly. Somebody else? We got a minute or two, a few minutes here. Anybody else? Unmute and go. Awesome. Cool. That was an awkward small group moment right there, Shane. It happens frequently. I was trying to just sit in it for a minute. It was really hard for me. Like that was a really difficult moment right there. I wanted to fill the space and I just let it happen. So it's growth.
Wow.
Hey,
That is the longest I've ever heard you stop. Yeah, wow. That's pretty.
I was like, I
That's-
was pinching myself. I'm like, don't talk. Because I figured somebody's just trying to find the mute button because they have only been on Zoom like twice in their life. So that was the other thing I was figuring.
It's super helpful for us to be able to. I love how you approached it from an expectations perspective, because like, we've probably all heard from a refreshment and replenishment and responsibilities and all those things, but to be able to approach it from an expectations perspective, and sometimes the expectations are what's stated, and sometimes what's expectations is what we communicate even non-verbally and through different means. And so thanks for that just framework to be able to think through that, because I think that was really refreshing and helpful for me.
Love it. Hey, Shane, 1 minute. Again, self-serving promo. You've agreed along with some other guys to be with us in October. Don't do what you're going to do, but maybe give like a 15-second, like, hey man, love to hang out. And then what you're going to be, we're going to be talking about headwinds and tailwinds, everybody. So that's kind of our theme of leadership that Kay's been just wrestling with, the idea of like, we have tailwinds in leadership that push us forward, and we have headwinds that slow us down. And so all of our communicators, Shane, you're going to be talking about a tailwind of like vision. So again, don't give it all, but just a little bit.
Yep. Well, I'm going to talk about what I think is the key to leading in a church. But one of the things that I'm going to talk about is how do you set vision if you're not one of these, I go over to the mountain and come back and tell everybody what to do, which I don't think that actually works anyway. But it is, how do you get people together to create the vision, and so it's not just all on you. And I'm a collaborator, and so my best vision stuff is usually not my stuff. It is stuff that's come from our team that I can begin to hone and begin to own. And so I'm going to talk about how to do that.
Yeah, so that'll be one of our sessions together, just a tailwind. So again, Shane, thanks so much. I'll give you some notes later. It's all good.
Okay, right.
It's all good. So
it's good working with you, Lee. Yeah,
it's good. It's been fun. I'll text you tomorrow. Hey, everybody, thanks so much for jumping in. As always, we'll bundle the deck from this conversation and the recording that you can pass along. Appreciate it so much. And again, that registration for our October time together is live now. Kay just put it in the chat again, so it'll be in the email as well. So some of you guys, we wanted to get out to you in the middle of June because it's 3 or 4 months away, but you're setting your schedule, and we would love for you to set it and be with us, because you've seen all these faces on Zoom. It'd be great for you to be here with us. All right, Kay, anything else, buddy?
Good. Enjoy your
Awesome.
coffee today.
Oh yeah, that's right. Hope you got the coffee. It's available till it runs out. So far, I think there's still some there. So get an afternoon ice cold brew or something. All right, guys. See you soon. Thanks, Shane.